Do you ever just think, man, what if Josh was on Big Brother All-Stars? Or what if Derek X had just won that HOH that sent him home? Or, oh, what if? Hello everybody, and since you clicked on this video, the hope is that you already know what you're getting into. Hypothetical Central. This What If video series is a fun way to look at how one little change can set off a series of events that lead to massive differences in the Big Brother timeline. I like to call it the Big Brother butterfly effect, the BBB if you will. If you're a bit confused, let me try to help you out with an example. What if Josh Martinez never applied for Big Brother? Well, then when I watch Big Brother 19, there's no Josh to be the saving grace of the season, and then I consider it to be a complete dumpster fire and the death of Big Brother, and I stop watching. Therefore, this eliminates any desire for me to create a YouTube channel, and there would be no Ethanimale and a big lack of Big Brother content in the off-season. Now yes, that is obviously a bit dramatic and not realistic, but just a quick way to show how one decision made by someone can affect something else entirely unrelated many years down the line. If you have a what if of your own that you would be interested in seeing me talk about in part 4, please leave a comment as I love reading them and your hypothetical could be featured in the next installment. Now let's get started.
Week 4, I cut off Danielle's right leg when I evicted Nick, and here I am 2 weeks later, cutting off her left leg when her dad walks out the door.
In Big Brother 8, at the final 9, what if Dick doesn't hit the perfect shot during the veto competition? At this point in the game, Dick and Danielle were on the block and one was almost guaranteed to be going home. If Dick doesn't hit that perfect shot to win the veto himself, then Dustin wins the veto, doesn't use it, and guarantees that either Dick or Danielle will go home that week. Although Eric will most likely be forced to try and keep Dick through America's wishes, it may be impossible to convince the rest of the house to want to keep him, and I think that with Dick actively campaigning for himself to leave, that Dick will then be evicted. Once Dick leaves, it'll be at the final 8, and Danielle wins both the HOH and veto here. She originally went for Jen, but with Erica and Jessica not flipping back to her side, it's possible that she goes for the kill shot and nominates Eric and Jessica, but I think she may also go for Dustin as revenge for his snarkiness the week prior, so in the end, I do think that Dustin might end up being evicted here. Then, at the final 7, I do think that Danielle ends up getting evicted, meaning that going into the final 6, both Donatos are out of the game. So, at the final 6, Zach should win both the HOH and veto, and I truly have no idea what Zach does. So, for the sake of everything, let's just say he nominates his original choices, Jamaica and Jessica. It all comes down to Jen's vote on who to keep, and I think she keeps Jamaica in the game as Eric and Jessica are just too strong, and Jessica is evicted in 6th yet again. At the final 5, Eric was only 1 point off of winning the HOH, so I think he wins it. I don't know how this works with America's Player and all of that, but let's just say he nominates Zach and Jen. Zach wins the veto, Eric nominates whoever because I have no idea, and we're so far into this speculation, so we'll just say that Jen gets evicted. At the final 4 HOH, Zach went nearly perfect, so we'll say he wins the HOH again, and he nominates Eric and Amber, and I think Eric might be able to pull off the veto win, so in this case, he evicts Amber. The final 3 is Eric, Jamaica, and Zach. Zach wins part 1. I guess Eric wins part 2? I'm sorry to Jamaica, I just have very little to base her ability off of because she sat out of so many HOHs. Regardless, it's a showdown between Eric and Zach, and if Zach wins, he brings Jamaica to the end and he loses. If Eric wins, I don't think it matters who he brings because I think Eric wins the game. This is definitely the least confident I have ever been in a what if because a lot of this is under the assumption that I can predict how players like Zach, Jen, and Amber will think when they're in power and the Donatos aren't there. Plus, I also have Eric winning multiple competitions, which is a baseless assumption on its own, so really, take this what if with a grain of salt. The main thing is that the Donatos don't win if Dick misses that perfect shot.
This is your final shot.
It came down to the last shot, and the only chance he had of winning was to hit the gold pole.
Cutting off her left leg when her dad walks out the door. And now that they're both gone, bitch got nothing.
Now, what if Dan doesn't get married in 2011? Seems a bit odd, but for those that don't know, Dan and Memphis were originally supposed to be on Big Brother 13, but dropped because of Dan's wedding. So, if Dan doesn't get married at this time, then him and Memphis take over Dick and Danielle's spot in Big Brother 13, meaning that Dick doesn't leave the game, and Danielle doesn't defect over to the newbie side, giving the vets an unreal advantage going into the game. The regulators still aren't good, and the first 3 evictions stay the same. But right afterwards, since Danielle isn't there to win HOH, Kalia wins HOH instead in week 4, but the result is still the same, where Brendan and Rachel are nominated, Brendan uses the veto on Rachel, and then he himself is evicted. But now that Kalia can't compete in the week 5 HOH, it looks like Shelly will win instead. With pressure from Jeff and Jordan, does Shelly nominate Kalia and Lawan? It's possible, but here's the thing. Because Dick doesn't leave in week 1, there is no need to have a battle back to put the schedule back on track, so Brendan likely doesn't come back. There's no fun shenanigans with Lawan and special powers, and Rachel is left alone once more. I think that the game is decided around here at the final 9. I think that with an overwhelming veteran majority now, it might be very difficult for a newbie to win, and if Dan and Memphis can't flip the script and get Jeff out sooner rather than later, Jeff could very well just dominate a path to the end with help from Jordan, Adam, and Shelly. If Dan and Memphis can flip the script with the help of Portia and Shelly and succeed in getting Jeff out, then I truly do believe that it is anybody's game to win, with Rachel surprisingly being an underdog favorite to win again. Regardless of what happens in Big Brother 13, the biggest change happens with Big Brother 14, because Dan probably doesn't come back for this season. Obviously, this changes everything, but first off, who replaces him? If Dick is unaware of his personal matters that he found out about in the Big Brother 13 house, it's possible they bring back Dick again, and then everything that happened in week 1 of Big Brother 13 happens in Big Brother 14, which definitely makes things difficult. Not only does the gameplay of Season 14 change drastically, but we miss out on every legendary moment involving Dan, and that's not something I would want to risk losing. It's also likely that Ian doesn't end up winning. Both himself and Danny Donato aren't invited back for Big Brother 22, and there might be just one other person who also isn't invited back for Big Brother All-Stars.
Go again.
So, like I just hinted, it's likely that with Memphis getting his second shot in Big Brother 13, he probably wouldn't be given a third shot on All-Stars. But it's also possible that maybe the butterfly effect would change things in a way where we wouldn't even have to worry about that. What if Josh and Kaycee didn't have positive COVID tests for Big Brother 22? This means that Keisha and Memphis are no longer on the cast, as they were alternates that filled in for Josh and Kaycee, and I think this actually changes quite a lot, because this means that there is now a very dominant double duo alliance of 4, with Tyler, Kaycee, Josh, and Christmas. I don't think the early game has changed, at all, unfortunately, but I think that the late game actually shifts greatly. Let's assume that Kevin unfortunately ends up going in week 1. Then similarly, Janelle, Kaser, and Nicole Anthony leave as well, with Bailey rounding out the pre-jurors. Now, I do think that with Kaycee around, Tyler doesn't have his sullen quitting phase in week 5, and we are spared from that mess, which means that Tyler is once more a big power player coming into the jury phase. With that said, I think a divide in the house starts around this time. With Memphis no longer there, I don't think the committee ever truly forms, and I think we may end up with a somewhat split yet equally powerful house. On one side, we have Tyler, Kaycee, Christmas, Josh, and David, and on the other side, we'll have Cody, Enzo, Danny, and Nicole Franzel, with Ian and Devon pretty closely attached, particularly to Nicole. I don't think it'll be like Big Brother 6 lines drawn in the sand, but I do think it will be a tensions rising, waiting for all hell to break loose kind of thing, with Cody and Tyler being cordial, but both understanding that as game players, they're kind of the kingpins on opposite sides, and sooner or later, war will break loose. I think Josh and Danny will end up having a big blow-up, which you'll love to see. I think Enzo will convince the Tyler side of things that he's with them, but he'll secretly remain fully loyal to Cody, and I do think that there's a chance that Tyler gets sniped out of the game in week 6 when Danny wins the HOH, as Tyler's side simply won't have enough numbers to keep him in. But I also think that it's possible that Kaycee can pull through and win that wall HOH over Danny, and then make a move against the other side and have the battle between the sides go on even longer. I do think that in the end, Cody's side will triumph and Cody will still win the game, but I think the beginning of the jury phase will be a battle between the two sides. Josh will stir the pot and keep things heated and alive until he's taken out, and it won't be nearly as predictable and boring as it was in reality. So I know it sounds crazy to many, but I truly believe that had Josh and Kaycee not tested positive for COVID before Big Brother 22 started, that we could have had a much more entertaining, dare I say, all-star worthy season. And the crazy thing is that it doesn't even have that much to do with them as individuals, but more so a combination of not having Memphis in the house, forcing the committee together, along with balancing the New School side of the cast to allow there to be two solidly powerful alliances of New School going at each other as opposed to just one big alliance that overpowers everyone else.
So I was going back and forth, kind of negotiating between All-Stars and Challenge, and I ended up going with All-Stars.
But while in lockdown preparing for Big Brother, Josh had 2 COVID-19 tests come back positive, even though he had just had a recent bout with the virus and was testing negative before joining the show.
I try to see the blessing in everything, but I was heartbroken.
Now, what if Paul won Big Brother 18? Well, geez, let's just say that in this situation, Paul still brings Nicole to the end, but Devon, who up to this point had been pretty pro-Paul in the jury house, actually ends up voting for Paul, giving them the 5-4 victory over Nicole. In this situation, I obviously do not think that Paul is brought back for season 19, and I am left with a few choices. Does production still bring back one returnee and have the same formatted season? If so, who? Given the time period, I think either Vanessa or Victor would be solid choices. But Vanessa would probably say no, so if they were going to have a returnee again, I do think it would be Victor. In the Victor timeline, I do not think that he is nearly as dominant as Paul was, but I also don't think that Cody would be super anti-Victor like he was with Paul, so I think it would make for a much less one-sided season, but I don't necessarily think Victor makes it to the end, and Jason and Alex probably dominate the endgame. If there was no returnee for the season, though, then I think a lot obviously changes. I think Cody and Jess are able to maintain their crew in the beginning of the game because A, they don't have a Paul to flock to, and B, Cody doesn't blindside his entire alliance by trying to nominate Paul in the first week because, once again, Paul isn't there. So I think the group of Cody, Jessica, Mark, Elena, Jason, Alex, and maybe even Matt and Raven are the power structure, and those that went out pre-jury for the most part are still taken out then, with the only addition being, unfortunately, the GOAT himself, Josh Martinez. I think Josh is still saved during week 1 because he still takes the golden apple, but I think that he'll be taken out not too much longer afterwards because he doesn't have Paul to protect him anymore. There's probably a butterfly effect thing where by Paul not being in the house, Jason doesn't accidentally break Christmas's foot, but that's kind of a gray area, and I'm just going to say that Christmas doesn't make it past the early jury portion. I think that around the final 8 or so that Jason and Alex try to flip and take out Jess and Cody, but Matt and Raven don't flip, and Mark and Elena are too hesitant to do so, and unless Jason and Alex can beast out the comps like they did in the real timeline, I don't think they're going to be able to against this much stronger opposition, and I do think that they are slowly taken out. And once they're out, I do think Mark and Elena are the next to go, and once we're at the final 4 with Cody, Jessica, Matt, and Raven, I think Cody and Jessica are somewhat easily able to comp out and make it to the final 2, where I think either one of them has a good shot to win. I never used to think that Jess and Cody would dominate the game if Paul was never there, but after running through everything, I have convinced myself that they would have the numbers, the loyalty, and the physical and mental prowess to win the late game comps and run the house and make it to the end together. So for me, I think Paul winning Big Brother 18 actually makes it so that Jess and Cody dominate and then win Big Brother 19. There is a bit of a larger effect to this, though. Josh is probably not invited to the challenge if he was an early boot on Big Brother 19, which definitely has an effect on the last 5 seasons of that show, albeit not necessarily gigantic effects.
Let's go, kid!
It's possible that Tyler ends up getting Scotty's vote to win Big Brother 20, as now there is no claim to the rumor of Scotty being influenced by the thought of America being so happy when Paul lost in Big Brother 19 and thinking that he would be the hero for doing the same thing to Tyler. And lastly, it's possible that if somehow Big Brother 22 managed to stay roughly the same the entire way through, that Cody brings Nicole to the final 2 instead of Enzo because she is no longer a previous winner making it to the end again, meaning she no longer has that extra boost to her resume, and Nicole Franzel then becomes the first 2-time losing finalist in Big Brother history instead of Paul. Just some food for thought at how everything could have possibly been changed by Devon's jury vote in Big Brother 18.
Y'all know Nicole was not my cup of tea. The whole time I've been in the jury house, I've been wanting her to come walking through them doors. And I cannot believe I'm sitting here building a case for Nicole. but Nicole, no shade to you men, but she was Geppetto and y'all were Pinocchio. That's how I feel.
Devon's final vote decides it. Congratulations, Paul. You are the winner of Big Brother.
And lastly, in Big Brother 23, what if Derek X won the HOH that sent him home? He seemed to be mere milliseconds away from winning, so this is a fun one to dive into. For one, he doesn't go home anymore. Let's go. But who does Derek X target? Xavier? Sarah Beth? Even though I think Derek X wants to go for Xavier, Tiffany and Hannah either convince him not to, or he goes through with it, but Xavier wins the veto like he did in real life. So I think Xavier remains safe regardless, and that the final nominations are probably Derek F and Sarah Beth, with Sarah Beth then being evicted. Tiffany now wins the final 9 HOH again, but either Claire or Derek X will likely win the Coin of Destiny to overthrow her reign. It's possible Big D wins the Coin of Destiny, but I mean, come on. At this point, with no Sarah Beth to target, I think Alyssa is in trouble. She's probably nominated next to Big D or Azza, but it's important to remember that Xavier is still nominated as a third nominee due to the comp from the prior week. If Hannah still wins the veto, although Claire and Derek X probably want Xavier gone, they have no votes to send him home, so I don't think it matters if Hannah uses the veto on Xavier or not because the cookout has the votes to send Alyssa home. And then, if history stays on track and Tiffany wins the final 8 HOH again like she did in real life, she is left in a crushingly depressing position where she has to nominate the only non-cookout members left, Derek X and Claire, creating potentially an even more emotional moment with Tiffany explaining the premise of the cookout to them and why she had to do what she did. It's more likely that she throws this HOH so she doesn't have to do this, but in the end, Derek X and Claire are likely going to be the next ones out if they don't win out, and when they're up against the competition prowess of Kylan and Xavier, not to count out Tiffany or Hannah either, I just don't think that there's much of a chance for them, and that the season as a whole remains roughly the same, but with a much more captivating and exciting weeks 7 through 10.
Big strides.
Congratulations, Baby D. You are the new head of household.
Whew, and there we go. 5 more what-if scenarios to prove that literally every tiny decision could have astronomical effects on basically anything. One slip-up, one change of a wedding date, 1 millisecond could be the difference maker on a future Big Brother winner 5 years down the road. Perhaps not, but you'll never know until it happens. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge extra special shout out to my YouTube members, who I think finally deserve a proper shout out. Thank you to Robbie DLC, Titlefish, Vera Wang, Cheesy Nas, S2E Red Falco, Carrie Ann Broadway, Angie Kennedy, Michaela Scott, Nathan Gasolfo, Jason's Neighborhood, Jay Hit 'em Up 2 times, Morris Bhutan, Collins Tribal Council, Alternatic Productions, Caden Bass, and David Clark. Y'all are the absolute greatest. And as always, here's a clip for you on your way out.
She's gonna be so scared.
I'm gonna knock my door. I swear to God, if somebody, guys, I'm gonna have a heart attack if somebody pops off. Oh, what the?